How's it going, guys? Welcome to the podcast. We just got finished wrapping up a fantastic episode of Andy Goodall from the T6Harvard.com website. Man, he's a great guy. He went flying recently in his T6 Harvard and produced a great video, and we had a hell of a time. He's a seriously good pilot, so you need to go and check it out. Absolutely. And if you haven't seen the video already, go and check it out before or after this podcast. So make sure you don't miss it. It's going to be fun, and it's a great video. But guys, these videos, these guests, just doesn't happen usually, but it is happening because of the incredible subscriber base and support system I have going for the show, which is just taking it to the next level all the time. Every single day, there's just something that's improving because of the fantastic fan base that is listening to this podcast and interacting with these episodes. So I'm going to ask you if you could do the same today. If you're new here, please do hit subscribe, support the show. It just helps so much getting it to the next level and bringing on these incredible people. And if you are a regular at the show, please do the usual. Please leave a like, please share it around, and leave a rating and a review. It makes a massive difference. But for now, I'm going to take you over to this episode. It's a great one. I know you're going to enjoy it. So see you there. So Andy, how you doing today, man? And welcome to the show.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. It's an absolute honour to be invited, and yeah, let's go.
Gonna be fun, man. And yeah, so for the people who don't know, recently put out a video flying in the T6 Harvard or Texan, Wacky Wabbit, and that was with Andy here. So this is kind of the two-part. We're going to dive into Andy's career and all the cool stuff he gets up to now, and do invite you to go and check out the flight video too, which is a hell of a load of fun. But for people who go and watch that and are here now, how's it been since then? What have you been up to? You been flying anything cool?
Since we last flew, I ended up having to go back to work, unfortunately, in the Middle East. So that was probably the last flight I did. But I'm looking forward to getting back in a few days again. And we've got a bit of Harvard stuff going on, a bit of hurricane stuff going on. So very excited and hoping that the weather plays ball. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Well, that sounds pretty cool, man. And anyway, so anyone who starts here on the podcast and then goes over to the video, for example, let's have like the 30 to 60 second-ish kind of elevator pitch rundown. You know, you've just met someone, they're like, so what do you do for a living? So how would you describe you in a minute?
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so I work out in the Middle East. I've been here for about 14 years now. I started on the ship security and then moved into other areas. But anyway, aside from that, I've got a little side is my own small flying school where we teach people to fly tail dragger airplanes. But primarily, we try and get them onto the Harvard. We teach them on the Harvard, and from there they can go on to other airplanes like Spitfires and Hurricanes. So we've been running that school since 2019, and yeah, it's going from strength to strength. We do about 200 trial lessons a year, from Skegness to Old Warden to Foulmere. Our main base is at Peterborough at the moment, and we've just brought a little Oster into the frame, and probably looking at bringing another aeroplane in at some point as well. So yeah, it's going from strength to strength. Really good.
So cool, man. And no, it's clear that you've got a good thing going there, and obviously we got to fly, so that was a hell of an experience. Got to experience the Andy Goodall flight firsthand, and I can vouch. You're a talented guy. You're in the right industry. But let's look at how you got here then. So kind of backstory to start with, where we kind of usually begin with the show. You know, where does all this stem from for you? The whole aviation thing. What were your kind of initial drives towards the industry, and just kind of take us through a bit of your career, really getting up to where we are now.
Yeah, so initially I was in the army, and I was in the parachute regiment, and I was lucky to get selected to go into the Red Devils freefall team.
Nice.
So I was on the Red Devils for about 5 years, and during that time I did about 2,500 jumps, 250 public displays into everything from Wembley Arena to Richard Branson's back garden, you name it, we did it. But the interesting thing is we had an Islander, twin turbine Islander airplane, and one day the regimental colonel came down and said, Corporal Bloggs, where do you see yourself in 2 years? And it came to me, Corporal Goodall, where do you see yourself in a few years' time? And I went, I'd quite like to fly that, sir. pointed at the Islander, and he said, "Don't you think that's rather ambitious?" I went, "Right, okay, I'm going to fly that airplane." 4 years later, I was flying that airplane, so that was a huge motivator for me. And then I continued, flying parachute airplanes, caravans, a bit of time in a Twin Otter, the Islander, and then from there, I really wanted to fly Warbirds. I was lucky enough to meet a guy that was building a Spitfire, and I said to him, "Can I fly it? When it's built?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah, sure." So I said, "Okay, what do I need to fly?" And he said, "I think you need some Harvard time." He wasn't a pilot himself, and so I went and found a Harvard, started flying it. I realised that I couldn't really afford it, so I bought a share in it, which drastically reduced the amount it cost. Eventually, I bought a couple more shares, and that's really where the whole Harvard thing expanded from. So I never got to fly a Spitfire, but it did lead on to other cool, interesting airplanes.
Certainly did. Talk us through some of those airplanes then. So I think, we spoke about it, but for the people listening, talk us through some of because for me, when I think of you, you're one of those kinds of people who I can imagine, you could think you know everything about you, and then you'd have like one of those moments where it's like, "Oh yeah, I did this," and just be like, "What?" So, what are some of those like coolest things that you've flown? Some of those best stories really out of there.
I got told off for that again recently. My daughter found out that I'd had a dog, and she never knew that I'd had a dog. I just didn't, I forgot to mention it, years ago. But yeah, so cool aeroplanes. So I mean, for me at the time, getting into the Cessna Caravan when I was hour building, that was pretty cool. I went from a Cessna 206, which was probably, I rate the Cessna 206 as a real a good insight into a Warbird. Although it's only got a 300 horsepower engine, it's quite a big lump, and you have to manage it quite well. With cowl flaps, manifold pressure, RPM, a mixture, especially in parachute flying when you're going up to 10,000 feet. So yeah, I started in the 206 and went on to a thing called an airvan, which is a Gippsland airvan. Big in hill use them now for fly along the Spitfire flights. Yeah, quite a useful bit of kit. So I flew that for a while. And then that was a good lead into the Caravan. And to me, the Caravan was amazing. You had to, climb a ladder to get into it. It had a turbine engine, a Pratt & Whitney 675 shaft horsepower engine. And just the management behind that was really good. And flying these airplanes, you could be doing, anywhere between 10 and 15 flights a day, up to 13,000 feet, rapid descents, lots of landings. So I really enjoyed the Caravan days, and actually I've restarted again now on a super van, which has got 1,000 horsepower, and that really climbs, like a bat out of hell. It's 1,500 feet for me, almost 20 degrees altitude. So they were nice early aircraft, but the Harvard really opens the door for Warbirds. It's very similar in characteristics to a Hurricane, probably about the same weight as an early Mark 1, lacking a few hundred horsepower, but essentially it's not too dissimilar. So that's why it's such a good trainer to move on. 2019, I went out to America, and I did a P-51 conversion with Mark Murphy with the Collins Foundation. So I managed to do about 10 hours in the P-51 out there.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't want to not mention that. That was a very cool experience. Yeah, Mark didn't disappoint. It was a fantastic experience. So once I'd flown the P-51, the doors opened up, and then a Hurricane came along, and I managed to get into a Mark 1 Hurricane. I've got about 15 hours in the Hurricane and a display authorization on it as well. So that's a beautiful airplane, and I'm very much into the history like yourself. I love the history of these warbirds. So flying it's fantastic, but flying something that these guys flew, in 1940, with a Rolls-Royce Mark III Merlin 3 engine, it's kind of special. The same smells and heat and no enemy, but in the same skies over the 11 group, 12 group areas in these airplanes, absolutely fantastic. Other airplanes, I've got a little Oster, a little Oster 6, which is my run around. You know all about that.
Sure do.
It's an incredibly challenging airplane to fly. It's probably one of the worst Osters I've ever flown. The Oster 6, in my opinion, especially when it was molested by Beagle in 1964, they just made the tail heavier. It's quite a difficult airplane to land, but it is what it is. British belted braces aircraft, so that's an interesting airplane. And through time and flying these airplanes, I was invited out to Turkey, where the boss out there has got a huge collection of Warbirds. He's just bought a Mark 9 Spitfire and is getting it painted in Turkish colours. So he's trying to build a collection of aircraft that were actually used by the Turkish Air Force. Nice. So he bought this Texan here, which is the Happy Hour. He bought that from Gloucester in the UK. I demonstrated it for him, and then that was lucky me. That got me into the museum. And over there, I fly the T-28 Trojan, which is a monster of an airplane. 1,400 horsepower, Wright's Cyclone 1820 engine. Apparently it's pound for pound. Could beat a Mustang under 10,000 feet. But I don't know. I've not challenged a Mustang to that. But it's an incredibly powerful aircraft. And then I also displayed Tiger Moth as well. So the Tiger Moth was in the movie The English Patient. So I don't know whether you've seen that movie. Beautiful movie, beautiful videography, and all these airplanes in this collection are mint. So yeah, very lucky, and I get to display them probably 2 or 3 times a year.
Very nice.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's it.
Quite a few in there. It's a seriously cool list, and I think because something like a Hurricane, I think I read there's only 1 2-seater in the world now, and there's a handful of these things out there nowadays. It's amazing that you've been able to fly them. So kind of 2-part question here then for you. What is the attractant really for you personally in Warbirds, and like where does that passion come from for you? Is it something from your younger days? Because as kids, I think we all have that pilot phase, right? We all have that plane phase. So yeah, talk me through just like why you're so interested in all this.
Yeah, so I think it's an age thing. I'm a proper Gen Xer. I'm 56 years old, and when I was a kid, most of my dad's friends had been in World War II. So when I went to work with my dad, I would sit with one of the guys in the engineering department, and he'd be telling me his experiences on D-Day. Wow. Which is amazing because it's D-Day today. Yes. And he'd tell me where he got all his tattoos from, and he would show me photographs and tell me stories, and obviously I was obsessed by the military. But even little things, I went into a hobby shop as a kid to buy an Airfix model airplane, and I was looking at a Lancaster, and this guy next to me, and he had dark hair as well. That's how long ago this was. He said to me, why are you picking the Lancaster? I was about that big. And I said, I just like it. It's lovely airplane. And he said, no, get the Halifax. I said, what's a Halifax? He said, I used to fly a Halifax. And he started telling me about, this. And of course, veterans were 2 a penny back then. They're now 100 years old. But back then, they were my age or just a bit older than me. Can you believe it? And they were still working. And, so as a kid, especially my generation, you could literally, I could walk down the road, and these old airfields that we see from the air now that are broken up, there's nothing left. When I was a kid, there's still lorries parked and abandoned from World War II. There's buildings that we used to go into, which clearly, that was like the post office on the camp, because it had all the letterboxes and all the furniture, bits and pieces still in.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's incredible. My school had air raid shelters. They're still there now, but you can't see them. They're long since covered up. But my generation would play in the air raid shelters.
Wow.
It wasn't uncommon for friends of my dad to give me items from the war, such as a German dagger, a German helmet, all this sort of stuff. I had a huge collection of military kit. And, it's just incredible how times have changed. So anyway, that's where the history passion comes from. And then, of course, aviation through the military. I got into aviation. To be able then to combine history and flying is something else.
Yeah.
That's the thing for me, to mold those two together. You can read about it, but then to actually feel, I coin on my a lot of in my posts, flying in the slipstream of heroes. I mean, to be in the same place on the ground where a battle took place, and to be in a trench from World War I, or to be in the air where a dogfight took place, where you've got written evidence and you're there looking down at the same landscape in most cases. That's pretty intoxicating, history wise. So that's the passion, really. That's where it comes from.
Quick ad break here, guys. Just want to introduce you to Shopify. Shopify is the all-in-one e-commerce platform that runs basically everything I'm doing, from my personal website to my business websites. It truly is a phenomenal system, and I have a way for you guys to get started today for just £1 building your business, whether that's personal brand, whether that's e-commerce, whether that's a blog. It has everything. It has its own app store that can get you basically every feature you could expect from an online store, and it really just works out of a fantastic all-in-one system, which I can only highly recommend enough. And you guys can start for just £1 today. It's an incredible offer. Absolutely amazing. And the link to that is in the bio, or I'll put it up in the tab at the top. I think it'll be top right at the screen for you guys right now. So yeah, guys, check it out. Make sure to get this offer, and yeah, get started. It's fantastic. I think that's one of the things that really stuck for me too in our flight as well, was that you can't help but notice that when you climb into that cockpit of the T6, for example, that smell just hits you. And it's, if anyone listening has ever gone to Fleet Air Arm, or if they've gone to any of the kind of museums and these places where they have the old planes or helicopters and stuff, and you've had these little experiences in them, you can smell that history, you can smell that kind of vintage smell. Except this one, oh blimey, it flew that and some. So there's a hell of a thing there for being able to even just be part of that and in that experience, and just be immersed within that place where it just feels like you're living in a piece of history. But I mean, yeah, so there's probably only a handful of people really nowadays who can actually say they've flown the things that you've flown. No doubt about it. I mean, you must be well within the 0.111% or whatever of people who can actually say they've done Hurricane and a Mustang. So parallels between them. So what are they like, man? How do they compare? Just run me through what they felt like in that first experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are people out there with a lot more experience than me. I've just touched the tip of the iceberg. There's phenomenal pilots out there with a huge amount of experience. So with more powerful fighters, I'm still finding my feet. I've got a DA. But there's certain moves I can do, there's certain moves I can't. Where you go to an air show and you see some of these great pilots, without mentioning their names, they know who they are. They will rip up an amazing display. They know these airplanes so well. The training to get even into the Harvard is very layered. So when you get into it, it's not such a big surprise. So I always ask for 400 hours minimum. If I'm training a pilot, I generally want about 200 hours tail time before they come to me. So that could be on chipmunks or, whatever, cubs, osters, decent tail draggers. And And then, we start them off in the back of the aircraft, and then we put them in the front of the aircraft. So by the time you've built up the skill in Harvard and you get comfortable with it, and then you're ahead of the aircraft, and then you're enjoying the airplane and you're throwing it around and displaying it and loving it. By the time then you move up onto something like, say a Mustang, it's all very familiar. The Hurricane, for instance, when you put the power on, it doesn't behave any differently really to the Harvard. It doesn't want to swing you over any more than the Harvard. So my first experience was, I thought, okay, this might be more powerful than I'm used to. But when I put the power on to the correct boost, I thought, oh, that's nice. And it tracked very straight, and all the principles were the same. The tail came up, yeah, great. Then it came off the ground, yeah, started accelerating, gear goes up, yeah, great. And then adjust the power settings, climb away. All very nice. All the characteristics are different, but I found, the Harvard to Hurricane was simple. The Harvard to the P-51 wasn't a massive jump. However, the P-51 has got this massive, powerful prop, on the front, which will swing you over to the left if you're not putting a lot of rudder in. It is a stallion, but a bit more time on these airplanes, and then you start getting the hang of it. And think, oh, okay, I know what's coming, and then it's all very much just another airplane. But these are quite dangerous airplanes. Of course, if you have an engine failure, you're flying something now with totally different characteristics to an Oster or a lighter airplane. You're flying something now that potentially it's very, very dangerous. You've got to do the right things, have the right drills. But yeah, it's all very layered. As you get into these airplanes.
Yeah, so I was at a it got me thinking, because I was at a talk with Matt Jones a little while ago, and I've been looking at the whole Warbirds and Warbird flights and everything. Obviously, your website too, and been looking at all these planes and these Warbirds and pieces of history, and it got me wondering, how far into the future do you think it's going to be that we actually have the opportunity to do these kind of things, that we still get the opportunity to fly in a Warbird? Like, is there going to be a time in the future, in our lifetime or the next generation, where this isn't going to be possible anymore? When do you think the last kind of line of Warbird flights is really going to be, or are we going to be able to keep them going for a long while still, do you think?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Us Gen Xers, obviously we're leading the charge because we're very passionate because of our family connections. So just watching the news today with the D-Day celebrations, there's a huge amount of interest, but that doesn't mean to say that the average kid now is probably getting less and less interested in what happened on D-Day. Almost like people are fascinated by D-Day, but do many people know about what happened on the Somme in the First World War, or something that happened in the Boer War or the Napoleonic Wars, or whatever? They're very important at the time, but it's history sort of starts moving on at a rapid rate. So will kids in the future, in 30, 40 years, still have an interest in World War II and understand that these airplanes are iconic and what they did? That's something I think about. I don't know whether that will happen or not, but certainly the build rate of Warbirds is huge. The amount of Spitfires now that are being, knocked out, at the rate of probably one a year or one every 2 years around the world. They're still building them. Hurricanes is probably, I think there's 9 in the UK, probably 3 or 4 Mustangs in the UK. So there's no shortage of airplanes being built, which is good for pilots. A lot of guys that fly for me have been snapped up now by the 2-seat Spitfire operations, which is great for them. But I have to, I need to get more pilots because they've been trained so well and flown so well. They've moved on. So in answer to the question, who knows? That's just that's why we're here, really, just to keep the history alive, keep people informed. hopefully it'll go on well into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. And to be honest, mate, I had no idea stuff like that was still being built. I had no idea. I thought the extent of it was people buying the props basically, or taking them out of museums and restoring them and basically putting new parts in and stuff. But I had no idea they were actually being built. So where's that happening?
Yeah.
Have I lived under a rock? Talk me through that.
Yeah, well, there's warplane workshop on TV and all this sort of stuff, and if you watch that, you'll just see, how quickly these airplanes have been made. The Isle of Wight, airframe assemblers on the Isle of Wight, they build fuselages, they build wings, they can build you anything you want, really. If you want, if you've got the money and they've got the time, they'll build you a fuselage and a set of wings. They're pretty inundated with work, but if you've got the money and the time, they'll build you that. And then there's other companies like ARC at Duxford or Biggin Hill. They will then assemble you a Spitfire again. And then of course there's other countries doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So propellers were actually built in Germany for Spitfires, and then recently Hercules propellers, they managed to get the drawings and they started making blades now from original drawings in the UK. So now we've got Spitfires being made with British blades on as well now, which is a good thing. And apparently they're very good, an exceptional blade. This industry, it's quite remarkable. And even more important, it's seeing younger people building them. So I believe airframe assemblers started off building aluminium hovercrafts. So the skill for building hovercrafts, bending and forming metal, we don't want to lose that because it's done on an English wheel and it's very precise. But then they converted and started, that skill transposed itself easily then to building Spitfires. So there's keeping the skills alive. If I have an instrument problem on one of my airplanes, I've got to find someone that can rebuild it like a watchmaker almost. There are parts, still in boxes, greaseproof paper about, but it's the skill thing that we've got to keep alive.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think one of the really important things to note there too is that it actually is in its own way, although a guest ride for someone in a Warbird is an experience for them, like it's their experience, but it's also contributing to a larger thing too, because the funds out of that too, they go into keeping that thing flying, don't they? And keeping maintaining it and the parts and keeping it going. So actually, someone who gets an experience, it's so important, not just for their experience, but also for keeping that history alive and also, keeping that thing airborne well into the future, really, with what we were saying, with inspiring people and stuff like the video, incorporating social media and stuff to showcase that and show people that thing so that they go and get that flight and then they help to keep it airborne. So important, isn't it?
Yeah, so airplanes that sit on the ground just rot and fall apart, especially a Harvard with 1 million rubber seals in the hydraulics. Everything has to be moving and working and getting up to temperature, otherwise these planes just fall apart. So that's why they need to keep flying. But every time you fly an airplane, you wear something out. I know, I pay the bills, so every time we fly it, something wears out, and over a period of 50 hours before the check, they'll find all sorts of things that have worn out, So when you've got a two-seat airplane like a Harvard or a Spitfire or a Hurricane or a Mustang, if you can take people up for rides in them, that keeps the pilots current, keeps the airplane flying, and the money from that, can go back into keeping the airplanes flying. So, my business, although it's a business, it's also everything goes back to the airplane. Nothing goes in like my pocket. I wish it did. Everything goes out of my pocket, and the business goes into the airplane. It's so expensive to keep going, but it certainly gives us a lot of pleasure, and it also keeps the airplanes flying, and that's the main thing.
Is it a nightmare to maintain these things? You know better than most people. What's it like trying to keep a warbird flying?
Well, I get people all the time saying, "Oh, right, okay, I'd love to do a conversion in your aircraft," and then I tell them the price, and and all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, okay, is there a cheaper way?" So the honest answer is, when I took ownership of the aeroplane, it was cheaper to operate for sure. But anyway, whatever's happened since then, you could be looking at around 50 to 60,000 quid a year to keep a Harvard flying, which is pretty much the same, I reckon, as a Spitfire, probably more, or a two-seat Spitfire. Just on maintenance, because you could have an annual inspection one year that costs X amount, and then the next year it could be 3 times that amount. Because, okay, so for a Harvard, for example, my Harvard, it's 80 years old. It is 100% 80 years old. Everything on it is 80. All the skins, the metalwork, everything. It's all new old stock. And the aluminium is quite unstable, because it wasn't built of fantastic aluminium. It was built when there's a war on, So one minute it could be okay, then the next minute, boom, this corrosion, not from the outside like rust, but from the inside, emulsifies out, and you've got a problem. It has to be repaired. So we can get corrosion problems. You get less, obviously, on Spitfires because they're brand new. They're straight out the factory, in most cases, most skins, everything. But certainly on Harvards, you're dealing with 80-year-old skins and everything. So yeah, you can get some real shockers on the bills. That's for sure.
Crikey, mate. Yeah, I can imagine.
So I kind of work on the worst case scenario. And then, if I'm doing 100 hours a year, it's just a simple calculation between, how much does it cost a year on average, and by 100 hours, and that gives me the sort of rate to work with, and that's where we get the prices from.
Guys, just to let you know, Talk4 podcast is on Patreon, and it also has a Spotify subscription too. So guys, if you are really enjoying the show and you enjoy all the past episodes too, and you just want to pitch in just a tiny amount every month, even just a couple of pounds a month or something, to support the show, help me get better guests on, and keep upgrading and upgrading what we're doing here, please do consider heading over there and just giving me some support. It means a massive amount. Guys, back to the episode now. Enjoy. Very nice. That makes sense, man. Yeah. So, right, let's go into the Harvard then, or the T6 rather. So, a couple of questions for you there. So, first of all, can you talk us through just a little bit of the history of that plane, what it was used for, where it was used, and also can you give some clarity on Harvard versus Texan, because I'm still confused which one's which. And the last guest I had on, Fema Heaster from the US F-16 Viper demo pilot, he was asking me like what I get up to and how I got into aviation before the podcast, and I mentioned I went flying recently in T6 Harvard. I'm pretty sure I saw one of his eyes like twitch, and I had to recover quickly and say, I think, oh yeah, actually it's a Texan rather. So can you clarify? You're wearing a Texan shirt.
Yeah.
So
Texan. Yeah. So this is a Texan. So I call my company T6 Harvard Limited. It's technically incorrect. There's no, as far as I'm aware, I'll get shot down by all the sort of rivet counters now, but there's no such thing as a T6 Harvard, but there is a T6 Texan. So I'm not going to rename my company. It is what it is. So basically it was first developed in 1935 by North American. And it first flew on April the 1st, believe it or not. And they made over 15,000 of them from 1938 to 1954. And basically the Commonwealth countries, during the war, there's a lend-lease agreement. We had nothing really to bridge the gap between a Tiger Moth and a Spitfire. So we had to get these North American aircraft over to the UK. And we had something like a Miles Master. There's none of those flying. There's obviously Magisters, but no Masters. That was kind of bridging the gap. And a family friend of mine, he flew a fairy battle between Tiger Moth and Hurricane, which is a monster of an airplane. So for the Commonwealth, we got these Texans in, or these North Americans here, NA whatevers, and we called them Harvards. So South Africa, the Commonwealth, Australia, New Zealand, Rhodesia, all these places called it the Harvard. And we also had, after the university, and we also had was it NA64 Yale, also after the university. So all Commonwealth countries will know it as a Harvard. All across the pond in America, they call it a Texan. And it's as simple as that. Yeah, so pretty much the same aeroplane, but there's so many variants. I can't even. I've got a friend. I'll say his name, Martin Pengelly. If anyone's watching it, look up Martin Pengelly. He knows everything about Harvards and Texans, every rivet. But there's so many variants. I can't really tell what's what most of the time. They're all very very similar.
Nice. Oh, cool, man. Well, I have to check it out and find out some more about it. It's really interesting. And so kind of go into like what you do then with the one that you have. So obviously people can go and watch the video, get an idea of what's possible and what it's like to fly one of these things. The flight experience video, but kind of in your sort of description, what's it capable of? What can you do in it? And someone looking for an experience, trying to, get an experience in the Warbird, what can they expect really from T6harvard.com, and like what kind of stuff is possible?
Yeah, so it's an aerobatic aeroplane essentially, and it's an advanced trainer. And they some of them remained in military service and well into the 1980s. They were used for training purposes in South Africa. They were flying wartime airplanes into the 1980s. Can you believe it? Some of the aircraft that went over there in about 1942 to train them on Spitfires, they still used them. It's called the pilot maker. And I can talk about those characteristics, later. But it's an aerobatic airplane because you had to be able to learn how to fight in one of those before you got into a frontline fighter. So the aircraft. So with my business, for example, I can offer a trial lesson, where you'll go in the aircraft with a flying instructor, and you'll sit in the back. It's fully dual controlled, and you'll get a flying lesson. You'll feel the effects of the controls. It's a exercise 3, effects of controls in the aircraft. And we'll demonstrate a role and what it can do. But for the braver people, we do a Battle of Britain experience, and in that, it's a trial lesson where you get control of the airplane, and then we'll demonstrate to you what it's capable of. So we'll run through a mini dogfight. So we'll get you up to about 3,000 or 4,000 feet, and then we'll in your imagination, you see a yellow-nosed Messerschmitt 109 behind you. We'll split S. We'll do some evasive moves. Then we'll go through a routine of what it's capable of, which is loops, Cubans, derry turns, point rolls, wing overs. We'll just talk about some evasive fighter tactics, which is a very popular thing that we do. And of course, it's great fun for the pilots because they get to, have a bit of freedom in the air, and get some display training in at the same time.
Yeah, nice. I mean, obviously we got to go do all of that. It was great fun. And I never even asked you, but because I wasn't 100% sure, but doing some of those things, pulling pretty hard. What kind of G's are you looking at in the Harvard or the Texan?
Well, we the Harvard. We try and keep it below 3G, because it's an old lady. It is 80 years old. And we don't want anything breaking or wearing out, so we're treated quite gently. It's capable of a lot more than we do, but so when we do a loop, it's generally 3G max, and it's not sustained for very long. It's only a short period of 3G before it starts to go to 2 to 1. back to 2 to 3 on the way around. Yeah, so we're very, very gentle with it. We do go into a dive and achieve about 200 miles an hour to initiate something like a loop, 180 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour. But it's an incredibly thirsty engine, the Pratt & Whitney engine. It's 600 horsepower, or 1340 radial, and it can really drink the juice. So when you're doing aerobatics, when the power lever or the money lever goes forward, and that butterfly valve opens and the fuel is pouring in at about 40, 50 gallons per hour, you don't want to be at that power setting for very long. So we do the aerobatics for about 8 minutes maximum.
Interesting. So actually, I wondered about this because in the flight video, when I was editing and everything and listening to the audio from our feedback, sometimes you miss a few things within the actual flight itself. But listening back, you mentioned that you had aerobatic power or like maybe aerobatic mode or something. So is that what that is? It's kind of like an extra fuel dump into the engine, basically. I guess that's a parallel to kind of like what an afterburner would be then, is it? Or
no, not quite. I'd love an afterburner if it
not an afterburner, but what I mean, it's extra power, basically.
Yeah. So the engine's supercharged. So if the engine wasn't supercharged, it would be at about 30 inches manifold pressure. But because we've got a supercharger, we can compress the air. We can achieve manifold pressure up to 36 inches. So it doesn't really mean a lot, but it's giving the engine that extra boost. But to get it up to that power setting, there's a huge increase in fuel consumption by the engine. So we'll generally aerobat the airplane at 30 inches, and the RPM is the speed of the engine. We'll have that at about 2,000 RPM. But then if we were to go into the cruise, we'd bring the power setting back to about 23 inches and the RPM back to about 1,800 RPM. So, the difference is in cruising, low power, and aerobatics, high power. There's a big difference in fuel consumption.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Thanks for the clarity there, mate. I appreciate it. So we'll go into how to book and everything and how to get an experience right at the end, but we always kind of go for like a little bit of an actionable piece before we kind of sign off, so people can take a few things away from here. Not that they haven't already, but just a few things to apply. And I think one of the things that really sticks out for you to me is that you've turned something that's pure passion into something that's business, and you're basically living the dream of your own dreams. So in terms of kind of career advice, getting into aviation as a youngster, turning passion to profit, any tips, any lessons you've picked up along the way that we could kind of share here?
Well, no, it sounds kind of corny, but you got to follow your dreams. I've always done that. When I left school, I was like, I want to be a paratrooper, and there's a 75% failure rate. I became a paratrooper. It hurt a lot, but and then when I wanted to fly a Warbird or Warbirds, it's like I wanted to fly them. So how do I do it? It's a step-by-step thing. It doesn't always go step by step. It goes, it kind of sometimes goes backwards. Sometimes plateaus. But you just got to keep going. So my daughter, for example, she's 16 now, and she wants to fly the Harvard. Great. So get your PPL. Number one, get a flying license. So she's got to now, she's got the tools. She knows the right people. She's just got to go to a flying club now, earn some money, probably work at the flying club, work behind the desk, have a weekend job there, clean airplanes, whatever it takes. But, she needs to pay for those flying lessons and study, get the exams done. And that's stage one. So people always say to me, how do I do it? Well, first of all, have you got a license? No, we'll get a license, and that, however, whatever sacrifices it takes to get a license. And then once you've got a license, you then need to hour build. But if you're interested in Warbirds, it's better to start getting into chipmunks as soon as you can, aerobatics, anything, just to start building that tail time. And all the time you're doing that, you'll be meeting people that do the same thing, and you never know where your networking, as you know, will get you.
Yeah.
You know, your network is your net worth. You know, so you'll meet like-minded people, and you know, if you're really that interested, things will start to happen. You know.
Just for a second to introduce you to a brand called Aviate. Aviate are an incredible aviation-inspired watch brand which make fantastic, as I said, aviation-inspired watches with different themes, all with a bit of history attached to them too, and just certain designs which have certain themes which just look phenomenal and really commemorate certain bits of legendary aviation history. So I highly recommend you check them out, and they are kind enough to have given us a discount for this show. So if you do see something that particularly calls to you, if there's a piece of history there that you think, hey, I really like this and this watch commemorates that perfectly, go and check them out, and please use the code LewisKeeping20 for a meaty 20% off any full price watch at Aviate. Guys, going to take you back over to the episode now. I know you're enjoying it, so see you there. Yeah, so true. And yeah, I think, you know, this podcast is definitely a testament to that being true. I think the last thing I want to kind of touch on before we go into, you know, booking and wrap this up is, you know, but obviously we spoke quite a bit here about aviation, the youth coming in, the history and stuff, and, you know, the potential of losing some of that interest with, you know, the next generations of people. So, you know, if you had to say, you know, a couple of entry points into books, movies, pieces of history that you need to read, or things maybe less known from the war times that people should, you know, that kind of checklist of, hey, do you know this? If you don't, go look. Any of those things for people to take up?
Well, you can watch Empire of the Sun and see if you can spot the Wacky Wabbit. So yeah, the Harvard was actually in Spielberg's Empire of the Sun. It actually gets blown up, so it's painted as a Japanese zero for the film, and he blew it up. Thankfully, someone rebuilt it after the film. You know, you've got to watch A Bridge Too Far, classics, and obviously the Battle of Britain. You know, so that is essential watching, just to, you know, get you into the flow of things, and you know, good movies.
Absolutely, so true. Yeah, absolutely. You guys, yeah, you need to go and do that. But obviously, that's movies, and that's yeah, that's pieces of work people can go and look at. But I think the truth is, what I've found really is that the thing that sparks the most interest in me learning about things is something that has something to do with an experience. Like, I've never learned more about history than after I got inspired by having an experience. So, you know, those are our 4 questions for today. But if we go into kind of shameless plug now, you know, social media, booking and everything, like, how can people get an experience, and, you know, where they need to go, and yeah, just where can we find more about all of this?
Yeah, so for example, I'm now based at Peterborough Conington, lovely little airfield. Well, as you know, you've been there, and you know, most of our bookings come from online bookings. So we're at www.t6harvard.com, and we've just got an online booking system, where people can choose their experiences. So you know, some people want a basic flight, which is a trial lesson of 20 minutes. That's from when the airplane moves to when it lands. Some people want to go for it, and they want the Battle of Britain experience, you know, which we video as well. We've got lovely cameras, one in your face and one outside, and it's full. You know, all the audio is on there, so everything you say will be recorded. You know, and yeah, so we have that added on. But we also do 1 hour fighter sweeps as well. You know, so we do a 1 hour fighter mission where we'll take you around different World War II airplanes, aerobatics, get bounced by another aircraft in your imagination, obviously. You know, if you wanted to fly with a Spitfire on the wing, we can organise that. If you want to fly with a Hurricane on the wing, we can organise that. You know, and yeah, it's a fully immersive history lesson, really. All the pilots, all of us, are big history geeks. You know, so we love talking about, you know, the history as we're flying as well. You know, so that keeps people interested. I run an Instagram account as well, Warbird Experience UK. There's about 90,000 people on there, and they're all people that like warbirds. It's amazing. You know, some of the feedback I get. You know, so we put a lot of wartime footage on there, also shamelessly plug our own company as well, because it takes a lot of effort to keep this social media presence alive. But it's all in the good cause. Everything we do is to keep the Wacky Wabbit, as we call it. That's an interesting story as well. But everything we do is to keep the Wacky Wabbit flying. And we've got so many volunteers that volunteer for the organisation. So if there's anyone there that wants to volunteer, drop us a line. Pop over to Peterborough or Old Warden or wherever we are. We always need help. And of course, all the volunteers that help us, they get free flying as well. We sling them in the back, go to different air shows with them. So there's an opportunity for volunteers as well, and everybody gets quite a lot of experience out of it.
Oh, that's brilliant! Awesome stuff, Andy.
We had a bit of a fastball the other day to go to East Kirkby. So again, one of the guys got a nice little flight down there, and brilliant.
Nice. Well, it sounds like a great opportunity for anyone listening in, and having my own experience, I can only say I recommend it. I recommend it very highly. And last question of the day, really, here is just kind of new tradition: is if you found a 12, 13, 14-year-old Andy Goodall running around the streets, you had a little moment to whisper in his ear, give a bit of life advice for what's to come, what would you tell him?
Oh my God, you put me on the spot now. I would literally just tell him to do what I said. I know it sounds corny, but if you've got a big idea, follow it. I've heard it so many times. I used to be a competitive skydiver, and there's an American guy called Jack Jeffries who was on one of the best four-way teams in the world, Arizona Airspeed, and he says, once you've got a team, stick with it, right? And you'll be amazed where that team will go, because teams break down all the time, But if you keep the same team, you train together, you work together, you keep training, you can only get better and bigger, and before you know it, you're world champions. So I've always had that mentality from being, competitive sportsman. I'd say to that guy, if you think big, you'll get there.
Nice, man. Well, dude, that's been a great podcast, and thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I hope to fly with you and meet you again in the very near future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cheers, Louis.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you guys for listening. This was episode 115. If you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. If you'd like to listen to the future ones too, they're all on the channel and they're all going to be coming up. We've got some great ones booked in and loads of cool stuff coming up. So hit that subscribe button, like, share, comment, and I'll see you guys in the near future too. So see you next time. Cheers.